I invited him into my house, and just a few minutes later, he took out his tool, and I was shocked by its size. I had never seen anything like that before. I'm a quiet, homey kind of woman. I enjoy the peace that my daily life gives me. But today, I feel the need to share something that's changed my perspective on everything. Something happened on an ordinary day that took an unexpected turn. I need to tell this story, and I hope you'll listen without judging, because what I'm going to tell might sound unusual. Just remember, I'm human, prone to emotions and moments of weakness. It was a warm, sunny morning, and like always, I was at home taking care of household chores, my routine sweeping, organizing, cleaning. With the house empty, my husband Arthur at work, and the kids at school, I take those moments alone to lose myself in music, letting the rhythm carry me as I go about the tasks. It's like therapy. I crank up the music, dance as I move the furniture, and let the tunes wash over me while I clean up the dust and clutter. That morning, the music filled the house, and I was so absorbed in my routine that I didn't even hear the doorbell. There I was, in a towel, focused on the beat of the music while sunlight streamed through the windows, lighting up the floor as I swept. I didn't know it, but a friend of my husband's named Martin had stopped by to return the lawnmower he borrowed a few days ago. He tried calling out a couple of times, but when I didn't answer, he decided to come around to the backyard to leave it. As he passed by the dining room window, he caught sight of me dancing and cleaning, completely unaware he was watching. What happened next still leaves me puzzled when I think about it. Martin stood there, just watching me for a few moments. He seemed fascinated, maybe surprised to see someone he'd thought of as reserved moving so freely, lost in the music without a care. He stood there quite a while before I finally noticed him, and when I did, a rush of adrenaline hit me. My heart raced, and I instinctively tried to cover myself with my hands, feeling exposed and vulnerable as if he'd seen a side of me that I didn't usually show. I quickly grabbed my robe, still a little shaken, and went outside where Martin was standing next to the lawnmower. Martin, what were you doing by the window? I asked, trying to keep my tone light, but my voice betrayed my discomfort. He gave a bit of an awkward smile and explained he'd just come by to return the lawnmower, and since I didn't answer, he thought it was best to leave it out back. He mentioned that he saw movement inside and got curious, wondering if everything was okay. Even though his explanation made sense, there was something about his look that left me unsettled. I joked to break the tension. You looked like a burglar spying on me, he laughed, but there was a nervousness there, almost like he was hiding some kind of tension. Then he suggested we get a drink to cool off since the morning heat was stifling. I agreed, unsure of what else to do, and invited him inside. In the house, I offered him a glass of orange juice. He sat down on the couch, still with that slightly unsettling smile on his face. As he drank, he made an unexpected comment about how fun it seemed to watch me so relaxed, so different from the image he'd had of me as quiet, calm, even distant. His compliments took me off guard, and I admit I felt a bit flattered. It's not often I get that kind of attention, especially from someone so close to my husband. Martin looked hesitant, like he was afraid I'd take his words the wrong way. But there was a glint in his eyes that suggested something deeper. I tried to laugh it off, saying he was just exaggerating and that it was just an ordinary day for me. But he insisted, saying there was something captivating about that morning, the way I moved, something he couldn't quite put into words. At that moment, I knew we were stepping into dangerous territory, and part of me wanted to stop it right there. But there was a curiosity, a feeling I couldn't ignore. When he finally stood up to leave, he looked agitated, and there was a tension between us I couldn't deny. I'd never felt so observed, so wanted, and it stirred something in me, a mix of discomfort and excitement. As he approached me to say goodbye, he leaned in, and before I knew it, he kissed me. It was unexpected, and I was completely frozen. For a moment, I let myself get lost in it, something I never thought I'd do. But as soon as the moment ended, a wave of guilt washed over me. What had I done? How could I let this happen? Martin seemed just as confused. He apologized over and over, and I just watched, not knowing what to say. Martin seemed just as confused. He apologized repeatedly, his voice low and earnest. I just stood there, not knowing what to say, my mind racing with emotions I hadn't anticipated. He finally looked at me, remorse etched into his face, and said, "Melissa, I'm so sorry. I never meant to put you in this position. It just happened." I nodded, unsure how to respond. It's fine, Martin, I managed to say, though I didn't quite believe it myself. A part of me wanted to blame him, but another part knew that I had been just as much a part of it. There was something unsettling yet exciting about that moment, something I'd never experienced before, and I couldn't bring myself to deny it. After a pause, he gave a slight, awkward smile and said, "I should probably go. I don't want to make things more complicated." He started towards the door, and I followed, my footsteps hesitant, as though I was torn between wanting him to leave and wanting him to stay. When he reached the doorway, he turned back, eyes meeting mine, with a look I couldn't quite read. "Take care, Melissa," he said softly, and with one last lingering glance, he left, closing the door quietly behind him. As soon as he was gone, an uncomfortable silence settled over the house. The music, which had previously filled the room with energy and joy, now felt distant, echoing faintly as though reminding me of how everything had changed. I sat down on the couch, dazed, replaying the events in my mind. The warmth of his kiss still lingered on my lips, mingling with an overwhelming sense of guilt. What have I done? I whispered to myself, struggling to make sense of my emotions. How had I let things go this far? The rational part of me knew that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Yet buried deep in my heart was a thrill, a feeling of being wanted in a way I hadn't felt in years. Over the next few days, I tried to bury myself in my routine. I cleaned the house, took care of the kids, and smiled at Arthur as though nothing had changed. But deep down, I felt like I was carrying a secret, a memory that throbbed like an open wound. Every time I thought of Martin, a strange mix of guilt and desire washed over me, something I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. Whenever Martin came over to see Arthur, I found myself avoiding him, making up excuses to stay in another room or leave the house altogether. Martin seemed to understand. He kept a respectful distance, but our eyes occasionally met. In those fleeting glances, I could sense an unspoken tension between us, a reminder of that one brief moment that had forever altered our dynamic. Despite my best efforts to move on, the memory of that day kept surfacing, gnawing at me. It wasn't just the kiss. It was the sense that Martin had awakened something in me, something that had been dormant for far too long. I loved Arthur, I had no doubt about that. But as time had gone on, our life together had become predictable, almost mechanical. And now, after years of routine, I found myself questioning everything. One evening, as we were having dinner, Arthur casually mentioned Martin. He laughed and said Martin was saying how much fun he had the other day when he dropped by. Said you looked really happy, dancing around the house. My heart skipped a beat, and I forced a laugh, trying to act natural. Inside, though, I was a mess. The mere mention of Martin's name brought back everything I was trying so hard to bury. I managed to keep up the charade, but I knew I was reaching a breaking point. Eventually, I realized I needed clarity. I couldn't keep pretending that nothing had happened, that I hadn't been affected. A few days later, I mustered the courage to seek Martin out. I knew I was playing with fire, that I was putting everything at risk, but something inside me demanded answers. I found him at a coffee shop he frequented on weekends. When he saw me, his eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly composed himself, a faint smile appearing on his face. We chose a quiet corner table away from prying eyes, and for a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive, as though we both understood the weight of what had brought us together. Finally, he broke the silence. Are you okay? He asked, his voice soft, laced with concern. I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. Martin, we need to talk about what happened that day. He nodded, as if he'd been expecting it. I know it was unexpected, he began, and I don't want you to think I was trying to. Before he could finish, I interrupted. I'm not here to blame you. I need to understand what that meant for both of us. He fell silent, considering his response. To be honest, Melissa, I don't even know what to say. It was a moment, an impulse, but since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. His words hit me hard. They were raw, honest, and they mirrored my own feelings more than I cared to admit. I've been thinking about it a lot too, I confess. But we can't go on like this. I have a family, a husband. I can't just throw all that away. Martin nodded, understanding. I know, and I don't want to be the reason for any problems between you and Arthur. But at the same time, I can't ignore how I feel. A heavy silence settled between us as we both grappled with the reality of the situation. There was something special between us, something we couldn't easily erase, but we both knew that pursuing it would lead to consequences we weren't prepared to face. Eventually, we came to a mutual understanding. As hard as it was, we agreed that the best thing for both of us was to keep our distance. I needed to focus on my family, my marriage, and he needed to focus on his own life. But that conversation, that shared understanding brought a strange sense of peace. It felt like we were finally closing a chapter that needed to be closed. I went back to my daily life, trying to bury the memories of that day. Bit by bit, I settled back into my routine, reminding myself of what truly mattered. But deep down, I knew that sunny morning with Martin had left an indelible mark on me. A part of me would always remember how he'd made me feel alive, desired, and now more than ever, I understood that some emotions, no matter how intense, are best left in the past. Arthur and I carried on as always, and I worked hard to rekindle the connection we shared, to rediscover the bond that made us partners. Yet, in a quiet corner of my heart, that day with Martin would forever remain a memory of a time when I felt like a different version of myself, a version I could only glimpse but never truly embrace. Martin nodded, a bittersweet smile playing on his lips. I know, Melissa. I've tried too, believe me. But some things aren't so easily forgotten. We sat there in silence, both lost in our own thoughts, the weight of our unspoken words hanging in the air. I realized then that this was more than a fleeting attraction. Martin had awakened something in me, a part of myself I had buried for years. It was a hunger for life, for passion, for something more than the comfort and routine of my everyday existence. But I also knew that pursuing it would mean tearing apart the life I had built with Arthur. The thought of losing him, of shattering the family we had created, was too much to bear. I had to make a choice, and I knew that no matter what I decided, a part of me would always carry this moment, this man, in a hidden corner of my heart. Martin, I said softly, turning to him, we can't keep doing this. I love my husband. I love my family, and I can't jeopardize that. He looked down, his hands clasped together, and for a moment I saw the same pain reflected in his eyes. I understand, he said, his voice barely audible, and I don't want to be the reason you lose what matters most to you. But know this, Melissa, if things had been different, if we'd met under different circumstances. He didn't finish the sentence, and he didn't have to. We both knew what he meant. In another life, perhaps we could have had something real, something lasting, but in this life, we had to let go. As we stood to say goodbye, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his touch gentle and filled with unspoken emotion. Take care of yourself, Melissa, he murmured, his voice thick with regret. I nodded, tears welling in my eyes, but I forced myself to turn away, to walk back to my car and to drive away from the possibility of what might have been. That night, I returned home, slipping quietly back into bed next to Arthur, feeling a mixture of sorrow and relief. I knew that I had made the right choice, but it didn't make it any easier. In the days and weeks that followed, I focused on my marriage, putting all of my energy into rebuilding the connection I had with Arthur. We talked more, shared more, and for the first time in years, I felt a renewed sense of love and commitment. I realized that what I had with Arthur was rare partnership built on trust, respect, and a deep, abiding love. But there were moments, quiet moments in the dead of night, when I would think of Martin, of the life we could have had. I knew that a part of me would always carry the memory of that day, the thrill and the longing locked away in a hidden corner of my heart. It was a reminder of the choices I had made, of the path I had chosen, and of the life I had decided to embrace. In the end, I found a sense of peace knowing that I had stayed true to the commitments I had made. Life continued, and while the memory of Martin would forever remain a part of me, I knew that my true happiness lay with Arthur and our family. I was a wife, a mother, a woman who had walked to the edge of temptation and chosen to step back, to hold on to the life and love that I had built. And in that decision, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed, a resilience that would carry me forward through all of life's twists and turns. Martin was a memory, a reminder of a side of myself that would always be there, but ultimately I chose the love that had withstood the test of time. I chose Arthur, and in doing so, I chose myself.